I think you guys are doing a fantastic job of all the heavy lifting. I've been agreeing with you. I think you've created an excellent map. The school teacher in me just wants to create some of the categories that what we're just talking about in this prior discussion is between you and Phil. There's one category, of course, which is the cynical one, is that the grandstanding one. We've seen Congress is usually unable to escape the bait to jump into any area of controversy. And on the grandstanding theory, are they just too distracted with Mueller in international crises right now to have the capacity? I would dismiss that one. They have a limitless capacity for grandstanding. That's not an issue here that is distracting them. But there are the other two areas that you've raised. One of them has to do with the complexity. Mary Barra is the gold standard of response here. We used to always use Jim Burke and Tylenol Recall, Johnson & Johnson. Mary's was superb and perhaps even better in many reasons. The magnitude of that was 129 deaths as opposed to 3 in the case of the Johnson & Johnson. But all those situations, Becky, as you were asking, they all were a single manufacturer that had the sole responsibility over the entirety of the product. BP, there was a much more complicated mess. You had finger pointing between 4 different entities, Halliburton, BP, and others. In this case, you have 900 vendors, so there is the complexity issue. That's a major concern. And there's a lot that the company themselves is still just figuring out right now, as Phil was mentioning, that the MCAS system safety alert, the angle of attack alert system, they thought, since Southwest was paying for it for a year and a half, that it was even working for Southwest. They didn't realize it wasn't engaged there. They themselves didn't apparently realize that it wasn't a standard package. You had to pay a premium for that safety. So the complexity is huge. But a third one has to do with the number of regulatory agencies involved is unlike any of the others. Right. You have, as Phil mentioned, the Department of Transportation, or the FAA, but the Department of Transportation, a guy named Scoville, I think his name is Scott Scoville, he's attacking his own agency. That he's saying the FAA's guidelines are not clear. You have the National Highway Safety, the National Traffic Safety Board. They're involved in this too. We also have a criminal investigation happening in the Department of Justice right now, which has tied the hands of management to be able to respond. And those are just some of the U.S. agencies investigating. We also have the Canadians, the Europeans, and the Chinese. So there are 15 different agencies investigating.
Point made.
Management, as this guy Calhoun, the lead director, said, what can we say? We're not allowed to say anything. So that's complicated it.
I mean, point made on the complexity. But let me bring up a point that I think Phil is making and maybe put that to you. Does Boeing have some sort of magical status as being such a big and important company in the United States? Phil made the point that you never saw McNerney come before any congressional hearings, even after the Dreamliner fires. Is that an issue? That's
a great additional point on our map. I cut myself off for once. I actually censored myself from going on longer, and that is the economic impact. This is 0.2% of the GDP people are talking about here, or maybe even 0.6% in terms of GDP growth. That's a greater impact than the 35-day government shutdown would have. And a lot of, I think, regulators are actually being responsible for once to not wanting to be too alarmist to complicate things more. That, I'd let Phil comment obviously on whether or not we're going to see these planes cleared to take off in September. But we've seen this Barclays downgrade coming out in the aftermath of them serving 1,500 flyers that are saying they're going to, if it's Boeing, we're not going.
Phil, what do you think?
Look, in regard to whether or not we see these planes flying by September, I think that's the expectation within the airline industry, although there's still a lot of questions out there about whether or not this will get through all of the regulators around the world by then. One quick point, Becky. Boeing, when I talked with them about this story yesterday, they said, look, Dennis Muhlenberg and other executives are happy to testify, but we think that ultimately it has to happen after all these investigations take place. If that's going to happen,
I'd like to know.
You're looking at something that's way down the line, a couple of years at least. I mean, it's going to take a long time for all of these investigations to play out.
If they did testify, and I think, Phil, you'd agree to this, since you also cover automotive, you're uniquely capable to look at this, is what Mary Barra did is she didn't pinpoint what the problem was. She said, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's our process to get to those answers. Dennis Muhlenberg could comment on that. Also, what Mary Barra did, immediately, she told us who on the board had oversight. We're only learning that now with a special committee, but who in top management. Mary Barra put together her A-team, including 3 rivals for her job that she had just gotten, to try to figure out who's going to lead the investigation, who's going to manufacture the replacement parts,
one other
who's going to
thing,
distribute them.
one other thing, guys.
Real quick, Phil.
Real quick. GM brought in an outside investigator, and they said, you tell us what happened here. You probe our company. That hasn't happened yet with Boeing.